Hello and welcome to the SciPhi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And today we are joined by some weirdo we met on Twitter with a PhD in what some might refer to as computer stuff, and he likes arguing online about stuff he's definitely not qualified to. You might have seen his account. His name is Dr. Theosib on Twitter, and his real name is Timothy Miller. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. I'm having a good morning today.
Yeah. Whereabout in the world are you from?
So I live in upstate New York. There's a town you've probably never heard of called Binghamton.
No, definitely not.
No, unless you watch, there's a movie with Hugh Grant in it called The Rewrite, and that's set at Binghamton University, which is weird. And also there was this science fiction show called Alphas. And they're
awesome.
Yeah. And they have this asylum for whatever these people with powers are to send them there, and it's in Binghamton, and they complain about having to go there.
Oh, brilliant.
Cool.
That was a really, really good series that got cut off way too early.
I know. Oh, yeah. Like that final episode where, like, what's his name's autism might have, like, gone away or something. And, like, he was, I don't know. I wanted to know what happened next.
Yeah, and it just never came back.
No.
Man.
It's a shame. And do you know what? That happens with like pretty much all of my favorite shows. They always get like 1 or 2 seasons and gone. Whereas the ones that are okay at best, 7, 9, 10, 20 seasons of this crap. And you're like, really?
200 seasons of Real Housewives and 2 seasons of Alphas. There's something wrong with the world.
I should have worn my Firefly t-shirt for this.
Oh, well, another great one. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to rewatch it because my wife has never seen it. But we've actually just been watching Castle because it's got the same sort of vibe and some of the characters from Firefly in it, but obviously a more realistic setting. I say realistic. Hello, Jovial Atheist. Nice to have you here. So anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself for our listeners who might not actually know who you are.
Like you want to do like a personal bio?
Yeah, just a bit about you, what you do, what your interests are, and that sort of thing.
So, I've worked in the computer industry since '96. I've done a lot of like low-level stuff, done hardware design, like digital circuit design. I have a PhD in computer engineering from Ohio State. I've fixed some game-breaking bugs in Minecraft that got me a little bit of fame among technical Minecrafters. And I am interested in, a lot of scientific and philosophical topics, mostly science, because I'm not really that good of a philosopher. But, if you look at my subscription lists on YouTube, it's a lot of physics and math and, some biology and things like that. So I don't know if I've answered the question.
Is there a particular area of like biology that you find interesting that ties into the physics and math you're interested in, or is it completely different?
I'm interested in neuroscience, if that counts. Although I would say I know more of general cognitive science, of which neuroscience is just one part. So when I studied cognitive science, I got some psychology, some neuroscience, artificial intelligence, philosophy, that kind of stuff. So, I'm really interested in just like how the brain and the mind work. I'm not like any kind of expert, but I do consume material on this topic. Mm-hmm. So it's like really interesting to realize that the only parts of your own thought processes that you're consciously aware of are those steps that go through your short-term memory in the prefrontal cortex. Mm-hmm. And like all the rest of it is completely like subconscious to you. So like it's a very small portion of your brain activity that you're actually aware of. And perception is really interesting too, because like there is it used to be called the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Now it's just like the Lex Friedman podcast. And he has on really interesting people. One guy was talking about what is consciousness, and one of them really this description really resonated with me. That I'm going to try to summarize it, and I'm going to bring in things that other people have said besides this guy. But our view of reality is like a simulation of the external world, and we keep it in sync with the external world, unless like we're on drugs or something. Right? No, but seriously, it breaks your link with reality. And so people think, oh, I have these great insights into the universe, and maybe you do, or maybe you just lost your connection with reality. And so we model people and other things in the world as these agents that we have mental models of, and then we use those models to predict what they're going to do next. And we absolutely need that in order to be able to do really basic things like catch a ball or hit a moving target, because we're always trying to take what our perceptions of the external world is and integrate them into a narrative that makes more sense than the raw signal, and then make predictions from that so that we can successfully interact with the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that within philosophy has been talked about for some time, and it's quite recent within the field of neuroscience that they've actually had the confirmation of, yeah, no, this is actually accurate. We don't perceive what we actually see, and I mean, it's how things like all the optical illusions and everything like that works. I mean, that is why I forget the name of it. It's why we see faces in things as well.
Pareidolia. Is that pareidolia? Yeah,
sounds right. I knew it began with a P.
Yeah, pareidolia.
So. But we're pattern recognition machines, essentially. So everything gets filtered through this, and we get a best representation. So it's nice to, and this is one of the things I do like about philosophy and science is, they do cross over into each other, and they do help each other and make things better, I guess. Is there a particular philosophical topic that interests you the most, or is it back into the mind stuff because of the crossover?
Well, one of the things that like I might actually be able to say something about is like where do things like logic and math come from?
Sort of the metaphysical question.
Yeah, right. So are they discovered? Are they invented? Or more likely, are they some combination of the two, right? And what aspects of math and logic are discovered, and then and what's been invented? Like so for instance, we think of whole numbers as being pretty basic. I mean, there are non-human animals that seem to be able to count. Okay.
Yep.
But what are we counting? We're counting what we perceive as discrete objects in the world. But are they really discrete? Are they? They're not as discrete from their environments as we perceive them to be, because it's adaptive for us to see these things as separate objects. So we can pick up that rock. So we ignore the fact that when it's in contact with another surface, that it's actually sort of loosely chemically bonded to it and isn't really a separate thing. Oh, and we ignore the fact that from space, it just looks kind of like a fluid. Right? It's just a little particle in a fluid, right? Is it really separate? Well, it depends on the scale, depends on your perspective, right? You got a bag of apples, you can count those apples, but when they're touching each other, they're not as separate as we think they are.
And I suppose if you zoom in to the atomic level, then yeah.
Right, they're actually like kind of knitting with each other in a way. And so that it's made me think that if whole numbers are sort of an artifact of our evolution, if we evolved differently, like we were those shape-shifting founder people on Deep Space Nine, right? And so we evolved as like this fluid, where there's no discreteness between members, right? Then maybe we would have invented real numbers before whole numbers instead of the other way around, right? And it's because where are we getting these things? Is we're getting them from our experience in the world, but a large part of our experience is instinct and neural hardware that's been gifted to us through natural selection. So when we discover math, are we discovering something fundamental about the universe? Or are we discovering something about the accident of our evolutionary history?
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I mean, Dave, from your perspective on the things like numbers and math, what's your take on it?
I mean, that's like I was saying just before the show, that's a really interesting take, and it's not really one that's kind of spoken about in philosophy because it's generally spoken of in terms of like realism. Are numbers real? Are abstract objects real? Is math part of the universe, or is it just something we use to describe the universe? And I generally tend to lean towards the anti-realist camp, where there are things that have instrumental value to us. Like we use them to navigate the world, we use them to build things, make our lives better, count. And I think this idea of the founders and how we might have actually come about with real numbers rather than sort of whole numbers first, that got me thinking a lot.
Well, there's a scale at which we can see that there are things that are discrete. So electric charge comes in specific units. Like you can't have half the charge of an electron, as far as we know, right? So I'm assuming that the science is accurate here, and so that tells us that there are things in the world that do come in whole number quantities. But the problem with so that validates the intuition that there's something real about whole numbers. But the problem is that we didn't evolve to be able to perceive that. So we're here at a macroscopic scale where we have no idea without special scientific tools that a glass of water is individual particles, right? It's a fluid, right? So a huge part of science isn't modeling what things actually are, like in terms of molecules and atoms bumping around, but in terms of smooth approximations to these things. And so we don't really come from a position in our evolutionary history of seeing things in the world that are discrete, that are fundamentally discrete. They're what we perceive to be discrete because treating them as separate entities has been productive it's been adaptive.
Yeah, it's basically the phenomenology of our experiences, what has guided us to kind of come up with various things and invent various things. And it's only as we've invented at the larger scale that we've managed to get down to the smaller scale and see more and more.
I suppose, I mean, this can apply to a number of different things, like we have the experience of things like free will. Yet, if you sort of take it up to what we understand about the universe, it definitely leans towards the universe being deterministic, and our take on free will is definitely not accurate in the libertarian free will sense, and it's got to be either the compatibilist take or just hard determinism.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings up an interesting question. So people, I get the impression that free will tends to relate to the ability to have made a different choice under the same conditions. Okay, and my first question is that what you want? I mean, you can look back and regret a decision you made based on new knowledge you have gained since then, but that's cheating, right? Would you have wanted to make a different decision at that time based on what you knew? Would you want your decisions to be random, or would you like them to be based on your best knowledge and experience at the time? And so that kind of puts the question of libertarian free will at, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to be coherent to me, because I want to make the best decisions based on what I know at the time.
No, I agreed. I think that's why, one of many reasons why I don't think libertarian free will really works. And I do think you will only make one choice because it is based on all of your knowledge and experience. It may not necessarily be all of your knowledge because you might not be able to remember all of it at that time, but the things that pop into your head, they're all the things that influence your decision there and then. And that's why you will make that one choice. I think that the key difference between a hard deterministic take and a compatibilist take is it's you that is making that choice. You are actively reflecting on things. And as long as there's no direct outside influence, like someone holding a gun to your head, it is your free choice that you have made. And I think
where
one of
the
the
choice
problems
comes from.
Exactly.
Yeah, the choice is an external factor rather than an internal factor, then you have made it of your own free will. If there's a gun pointed to your head, there's an external factor forcing you to make a decision that you generally wouldn't make internally.
Mm-hmm. Well, that also brings to mind somebody told me that this was refuted, but they didn't give me enough information on it. But what I learned in school was that there are neurological processes going on that you're not consciously aware of that go into making your decisions, your moment-to-moment decisions, before you're aware of them consciously. And so when you're trying to decide what to eat for lunch, there may be some conscious deliberation, like if you're a celiac, then you need to make sure it's gluten-free and things like that. But for the most part, you have some kind of gut feeling about whatever your mood is that's involved in that decision. So that's one kind of decision that you'll make, which is mostly subconscious. But then you have the decision about what kind of car to buy, and where you look at the listings of all the different features of the car, and you make a spreadsheet, and you do a bunch of math, and you work out, you find out what the long-term reliability is, and a myriad other factors, and all your entire decision-making process is laid out on paper or on a computer. And it seems to be a remarkably different kind of decision-making experience. Now, maybe underneath it all, it's really just one thing layered on another, but and when I talk to people about free will, decision making, that kind of stuff, I people often seem to be surprised that I'm making that distinction, because there's decisions that involve non-conscious choices that you're not consciously aware of what's going on in it. And
they're
then
autonomic.
Yeah. And then there are decisions that are entirely deliberate. And which one are they referring to when they talk about free will? Or is it it's kind of nebulous in
I think the experiments you were talking about there was the Lebet experiments, where they worked out that something like 60% of simple choices were made before they were consciously arrived in your brain. They were all unconscious choices. But that's still only 60%. And the experiments are on those simplistic choices. Like you mentioned, what you're going to eat for dinner, or should I go grab myself a beer or whatever. That's all being made before you've decided. Whereas a few more complicated choices, like you mentioned, like when you're purchasing something and you go through all the deliberation and all of that. I mean, there was one point when I wanted to buy a new laptop, and I was trying to go the cost-benefit ratio, and we were in a peak, and it took me almost a year to decide which laptop to buy, right? And I'd say that was a very deliberated choice,
By then it's obsolete.
It was because I found a site that did really good refurbs, so I got the exact laptop that I wanted, and it's still lasting today. I mean, I very rarely use it. I use my desktop more than anything, but it was just a nice, lightweight ZenBook, just for me to going out and about and doing things. So Mark is saying, funnily enough, should I go and grab myself a beer? Where is the choice in that? Because the other choice is always yes. Unless you haven't got one, at which point it's, can I be bothered to walk to the shop?
Uber Eats will do your shopping now, so.
Yes.
Crazy,
Yeah, don't leave your seat. You got to stay watching the stream. Pull up another tab, make your order, and you'll only have to leave the computer for about a minute to answer the door.
Just to pick up the beer, yeah.
Yeah, we actually had an idea of doing something similar to that when we were teenagers, because we were no good for nothing bums, and we were looking for some way to make money easily, and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we built this site and people could just come on and say, we say the areas that we service, and we just get it and we go and do people's shopping for them, and just bring it straight to the door. So they've got the munchies at 2 a.m, but there's a shop there open. We'll go and get it for them, man. We never did anything because we were too busy sat there with the munchies ourselves.
When I was a teenager, there were no websites.
Same, yeah.
There was ARPANET at the time, but yeah.
I don't even know what that is.
So, I mean, it's basically the original name of the internet. So, like the people who developed TCP/IP and the network stack, that was Advanced Research Projects something, I don't know. And so yeah, and they tied together universities using this network technology. Yeah. Networking is not my strongest suit, so I'm not sure what else to say about that. But yeah, no, so back when I started undergrad back in '91, there wasn't the World Wide Web. It didn't exist, right? I mean, it existed very shortly after that, right? But if you wanted to do an internet search, so there was the internet, there just wasn't the World Wide Web, right? Then there was something called Archie. And there are these, I think Archie was the search engine, and then Veronica was involved somewhere. And, and so if you wanted to like, for instance, download lyrics for songs, right? There was an Archie server or whatever it was called that you could go to, and you could get those things, and you could download them. And it was all text based. So you'd have a text terminal, and you'd run the Archie command on Unix, and you'd connect to this website, and you could go through the menus and find stuff. Yeah, it was very primitive. I remember when web browsers didn't even have tables. And when
yes, yeah, I remember that. When they first came out,
using BBSs and blue boxes at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Remember doing a little bit of programming in like QBasic and stuff like that as well. That was always fun.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I wrote a terminal program. So we had BBSs back in the day, but most of them were run on, IBM PCs, and they expected there to be 16 color text and 80 columns by 24 lines. And I was using an Atari ST, which didn't have a graphics mode that supported that. So I wrote one where I made these little character cells were 4x8. And painstakingly pixel by pixel designed the characters, and so then you could put it in a 16 color mode, and it became pretty popular. I probably made a couple $100 on shareware fees from it.
Oh, nice!
I might have actually used it at the time because I had a ST and an Amiga back then.
Yeah, it was called ANSI term, which is evidently a pretty generic name, but because there was an ANSI term, there were ANSI terms for other platforms.
Yeah, I was on too many drugs to remember the names of too much back then.
So, sorry, that
was my phone.
I thought that something weird was coming through my desktop there. It really threw me off. I forgot what I was going to say. So, I mean, if we loop back in briefly, though, to the perception side of things and the perception of reality, there are a few things you actually brought up just briefly before the stream of various things that show how our mind actually isn't working completely objectively. It's all filtered through the perception. Could you just tell us about a few of those?
So yeah, no, I'm far from an expert on it. So what comes to mind is a question that often comes up is if your perceptions are so filtered, are they really reliable about what's really going on in the world? And often they aren't, right? We literally see things that aren't there, like in optical illusions. We miss things. There's this classic video that they show in like neuroscience classes where there are these people playing basketball, and you're told to count the number of times balls thrown back and forth. And while that's going on, there's this guy in a gorilla costume that runs across, and nobody sees it. because they're so busy being focused on on counting the counting task. So there's a lot of that going on. But on the other hand, okay, so the flip side of it is that we have, if our perceptions were completely disconnected from reality, we wouldn't be able to survive in reality. Like, you're like, if you were taking the right kind of drugs to completely disconnect your simulation model of the world from the actual world, then you wouldn't eat, you couldn't do anything, right? And so there's obviously got to be some degree of reliability to it. And the other thing, so that's just my inference. Another inference of mine is that, or just an observation, I guess. If you look back into ancient history and you look at the earliest writings, way before scientific thought, okay, you have people thinking that dreams are somehow connected to reality. And they are, but they thought that they were more revelatory of reality than we know that they are. And so there was people trusted their senses, and they trusted their imaginations in ways that we realize now aren't the best approach. But what we've been doing as a species for thousands of years is developing tools and methodologies for maximizing the reliability of our data collection. So, you have a perception of red that goes through your visual processing system, and you know what that feels like. But that's, on the other hand, you can use scientific instruments and you can measure what the wavelengths of photons are that you're receiving. You can convert whatever information about the world that you would process very subjectively into numbers that we can process much more objectively. And so by using scientific instrumentation, we can gather objective data about the world and reason over that, completely disconnected from our evolutionary baggage. And so, people will want to get cheeky and say, well, can you trust the numbers coming out of the machine, right? And I don't really know how to answer that, other than to say that our ability to make accurate predictions about the world has improved. And that's like the main axiom. If you want to say, what do I hold to be self-evident? It's not self-evident. It's just it's sort of a philosophical and epistemological choice that I make, I guess. But it's part of the scientific method that has brought us the computers that we're using right now to do this live stream. Is the idea that if you have a model and you can make accurate predictions from that model, and predictions that you don't necessarily know to be true already, okay, and they turn out to be true, that increases the likelihood that that model is accurate. And so we can apply that to our senses. How reliable are they? And they're good at predicting some things, and they're really bad at predicting some others. And then we add in scientific instrumentation, and using that data, we can make even better predictions. In fact, predictions that can be entirely counterintuitive that turn out to be correct. I'm sure you've seen some of these probability puzzles. Like, if you open the door, if you got 3 doors and you open the door and you find out what's behind it, what's the probability of finding the thing behind the other 2 doors, right? And it's not 1/3 anymore. So, there's all kinds of things that where we've learned that reality is very different from what our perceptions of it or our intuitions are. And but when we rely on those things, we make better predictions and therefore are able to do things like build bridges that don't collapse.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what you mentioned there is basically taking a pragmatic approach. You're sort of viewing it in a fallibilistic way. It hasn't been shown to be wrong yet, and it's working. It's very rigorous induction, essentially, and yeah, it's working. And something else you mentioned about color. Sorry, before do you want to?
No, go ahead.
Something you mentioned about color was conversing it into the light waves and so on and so forth. it's one of those things that the experience can be completely different to that. If you know what the light wave is, you can't just instantly go, oh, well, yeah, that's red, clearly, in your head. You don't see red because you see this data.
Right.
And we don't know if what people are actually experiencing is the same red. You know, we assume that it largely is for most people, unless they're colorblind. But, you know, we all just sort of recognize red as red because we've been told red is red, and it seems to operate on the same waveform, but it could look completely different to each other, which again shows that perception can be completely different. It is somewhat reliable because we're generally in consensus with each other, but it's still just interpreting that data that you mentioned.
So that brings up two things, but so we'll go with the color one, okay? Different languages have different breadths of words for colors. So we all more or less see colors the same. I mean, there's genetic variation in the cone cells. So you and I probably don't see red exactly the same, but close enough. Okay.
Yep.
But okay, let's take pink. There are languages that do not have a separate word for pink. So for them, it's a kind of red. Like for us, if you turn the saturation down or whatever it is you have to do to turn red into pink, and you do the same thing to blue, we still call it blue. Okay. Then there are languages that don't distinguish blue from green. They have one word for both. And there are languages that don't have a word for red. In fact, there's a hierarchy in languages of color terms. And so the first color terms you'll get are basically light and dark. And there are languages that just have nothing but those. They can see the colors, but they're not culturally salient. So they'll just group things into, you know, and so they won't necessarily perceive a saturated blue and saturated red as really being that different, right? And so I think the next color that comes in, and it could be completely wrong, but I think the next color that shows up is green, which includes blue. Okay, so you have a green-blue term. Okay, and then I think the next thing that happens is they split. Okay, and you still don't have a red term. That's still just dark. Okay, and then I think red shows up in languages. Like, and when I say next, I mean in another language or as the language evolves or whatever, like the hierarchy of the color terms. And so we have things like, if we didn't have the term brown, we would just call it dark orange. But because we have the term brown, we see brown and orange as fundamentally different things, and they're not. I mean, you can't have brown light. There's a Technology Connections video that really needs to be seen about that, where he demonstrates how you cannot have brown light. So that it's really interesting how it's very Worfian, not Star Trek Worf, but Sapir Whorf. You know, in terms of how our language influences how we perceive and categorize the world, and sort of just shows me how relatively arbitrary our categories of the world are.
So you bringing up that, I learnt one the other day, and the color orange is actually named after the orange, and before that it was red, yellow, and magenta isn't a real color at all because there's no actual wavelength for it, and so yeah, it's just your eyes playing tricks on you essentially. So yeah, again, language and perception changing the way we see things.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had another point?
Oh, okay. So we were talking about fallibility.
Yep. And
now I can put my engineer hat on and talk about things I actually know something about. So we tend to think of computers as being these perfect digital machines that do the math exactly right every time. And that's actually not true. There are ways in which external factors can influence circuitry, but we'll put that aside. When it comes to developing technology, human fallibility comes in, so we get software bugs and things like that. And so, and then when it comes to building bridges and buildings, we assume that there are going to be environmental factors out of our control. Okay, so if you just assume, if you make certain assumptions about the reliability of things in the world, then what's going to happen is you won't account for when things are going to go wrong, and then they will go wrong, and then whatever you designed will fail miserably. Whereas those who have a much more pessimistic view of how the world behaves and see themselves and technology that we build and basically everything is fundamentally unreliable, then we build additional tools and build additional features into systems to, as fallbacks and backups and ways that we can gracefully fail or not fail, but like take the system state in a failing machine and silently migrate it to another machine that isn't failing and continue, and all you noticed was a half a second glitch and things like that. And so
try catch fail basically.
Yeah, there's a huge just in the technology world, there's this, and in engineering in general, there's this view of the world that I see a lot of a very idealistic, even if we don't call them idealists, idealistic thinking kind of philosophers that want to think, well, there are certain things in the world that you can totally count on, there's self-evident truths or whatever. And having come from, engineering where things are going to go wrong, and things you cannot possibly think of in advance are going to go wrong. So you have to have layers upon layers of error handling. Okay. I think that wanting to rest on an assumption that something is fundamentally true goes against all of the tools that we've developed in engineering in order to make our lives better, because we rely on it. Things will reliably fail. And we have to account for that in the design process and in testing and in the way we handle deployment. There's a feature that I want to add to database at work, and I don't know how to do this, but they want there to be a switch so that we can turn that feature off. If it starts causing problems, we can just switch all the deployments, switch that feature off across the board without having to roll back to an earlier version of the software. So I've got a bit of a challenge ahead.
Chuck it in a wrapper.
Well, one of my problems is I've got a database, I've got a library that it relies on. If I try to build the database to rely on either version of the library, it won't build because it's missing dependencies from the version of the library that doesn't have the features that it's. So I think we have to go the other way. I think we have to build the library, put the features in, even if they're not used, and then slowly, incrementally roll them into the database that uses them.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Actually, funny you mentioned this on the whole engineers tend to have this more pessimistic view. There's someone at work who higher up than me that when they review work, they literally test everything. So when you're going through, they're reviewing your work, and there's this guy who's written this program, and he told me some of the feedback that he got from her was she pressed Control Shift Backspace 1 and it caused the program to crash. And he's like, what user would ever do that combination of buttons? But he then had to build in a fix just for this thing. But those sorts of things can happen, and they are the sorts of things you try and put in there, and that's that whole sort of try catch fail environment that you do as a software developer, engineer, or anything like that do try and build into the world. And you need that sort of pessimistic view, because if you just think the happy path is going to happen, it really won't.
Have you heard of fuzzing?
No. Is that a sex thing?
No, it's not, sadly. So it's a technique for testing software where you basically throw random input at things.
Right.
So, for instance, you could throw random numbers over Ethernet to and see if that messes with your operating system's network stack and causes it to do wrong things. And so it's a fairly common technique. You find some way to throw absolute random garbage at your software and build it to be robust against that. And then there's something kind of related to that Netflix does. They don't expect their like servers that hold the media content to be reliable, so they even if there are bugs that like cause disconnects and signal drops and things like that, they have the systems of failovers that basically make the whole thing reliable, because they're just assuming that it isn't going to be reliable. So there's always some fallback that can be deployed.
Is that sort of how like Microsoft runs their web servers and stuff like that? They're sort of cloud, and they've got you've got your whole, well, yeah, I'm part of Western Europe, and Western Europe 1 is my main server, and if that doesn't work, we've got it mirrored on Western Europe 2, and then there's Western Europe 3, and if all of Western Europe goes down, we've got a failover in Eastern Europe as well. Maybe that's sort of what Netflix are doing. They've got all of that there behind themselves. And still sometimes it goes, yeah, we can't play this title right now.
Yeah, so when you have read-only content or content that doesn't change much, then you can mirror it across, geographically. So if half of Facebook goes down, you can usually continue to work because, like a data center in, I don't know, Virginia goes down or whatever, because, like Netflix, for instance, relies on Amazon Web Services for their infrastructure. And so, if one data center goes down, they can still function because they have all this data duplicated across sites. So it gets a little more complicated when you're dealing with mutable things like, YouTube, and you click like, and you got to synchronize that across all the different duplicates, and that gets more complicated.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially when sometimes there's a break in the chain and it doesn't do it, and that's why sometimes you update something and it's mirrored the wrong one back, and So we've just had a few people join us, so I'm just going to say hello to all of you. If you don't know what this conversation is about, we're here with Timothy Miller, who is a PhD in computer stuff, and we're just having a general chat about science and philosophy and all of that. So if any of you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to send them. Please tag me, just so I know you're definitely asking a question, because the chat is getting busier and it's hard to follow when you're having such an interesting conversation. But Nutbuster does say, who is David and who's Ian? So that's the reason you've done that. My name on Twitch, so we're simulcasting to a number of different places, is Davidian. It's a name I've written under. The reason it's Davidian is because it was a Machine Head song that I liked, and it's what I called one of my first characters in an MMORPG. He was like an evil character, so that's why I've gone with that one. Nut Murray says, "What's your bench personal record?" I'm not using it at the moment because I've damaged my back. I've never really gone for a max, but 110 kilograms, so 230 pounds roughly, I think. But kind of irrelevant to today. But that was 10 reps. So
but this weight is space weight.
Space on the moon, so it doesn't count. Yeah.
Have you got your space comma?
You've
there's a curiosity cat.
No, owl cats. What's he called? Baldy cats and conspiracy cats. Yeah.
I don't know if I know that.
Oh yeah. He's a YouTuber that he's like he's a science teacher, like in
the UK. Yeah,
in the UK, and I'm not sure like what level. And he makes these videos debunking flat Earth, and they can be very funny. He writes songs to make fun of these people. and he noticed this pattern of where these people would write comments and they would put a word and then a space and then a comma and then another word. And so he'd read it out and he'd say space comma. and so this sort of became a meme, and now he's got like this metal thing that's the shape of a comma, and it's a space comma. So yeah.
Awesome. Got a question from Randolph. He says, can your guests talk about how people have a least favorite color in addition to having a favorite color? For example, his least favorite color is cyan.
I have no idea. I'm not an artist.
Yeah, that's more of an aesthetics question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So, Dave, maybe that's one for you.
I suppose certain colors might strike you in various different ways, like sort of the qualia of it, and you might get a different association, like a different feeling from various colors. They might remind you of a certain time that you're not consciously recalling, and that might give rise to you having a certain favorite color.
It's kind of like smells. Like you'll encounter a smell, and you'll remember vaguely whatever was going on at the time. It's like, this smells like my grandmother's cupcakes, and so that gives you a good association. And this smell that other people would find completely innocuous, was something you detected at a time when you were being mugged or something, and now you hate. You don't want to. You want to
sort of like people who drank too much vodka and spent the night throwing up.
Oh no, we lost you.
Bloody internet.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. It was only a brief one.
Yeah, these computer engineers, they can't do anything. Can't get anything right. Yeah, it's sort of like drinking vodka and throwing up all night and then never touching vodka again. I would assume that favorite colors have a similar kind of association to that.
Yeah, that's true. It's and least favorite color. So a good way to put it, actually, it's really relatable. It's something that everybody can identify with. I wonder if people do have a favorite color before they've had those experiences, though. They just like it because, and a least favorite color because there's nothing to draw their experience from. They've just gone, well, yeah, I just like that one best, and I just don't like that one.
Yeah, it might just give them a pleasurable feeling. Sort of like seeing a piece of art. You don't know anything about it. You just like the feeling it gave you. It's just an aesthetic quality, I would guess.
Yeah. Lone Wolf, hey, this isn't live. Yeah, it's or is something going on the other end? YouTube has been a little bit glitchy recently. I know that much. He's probably just winding us up, though. I know what he's like.
He cut out a whole chapter of one of our streams last week.
Oh, yeah, it did actually, yeah. Although, luckily, once it published after doing that, it was there. But it was, really, really, really weird. Sorry, and Randolph says, I really like how you're now exploring the least favorite color topic. So yeah, cheers for that, Randolph. And as I said, anyone, if you've got any further questions, then please do it. Now, one of the things that we were first talking about, which inspired us to even have this stream, was people's perception of their arguments and the way they're presenting themselves, and people, the way they communicate their ideas, the way they might not actually be applying the right level of skepticism to what they're saying, and perhaps taking the time to consider the merits of someone else's point. And that's one of the first things that made you think, yeah, you'd like to come on and have a conversation about that sort of thing too. So would you like to just go into that a little bit?
Right. Well, so I was watching your video where you were talking about the worst arguments for, what was it? Worst arguments for atheism? I think it was.
Was it the
or it might have
theist
been
one?
the Christian one, the theist one, where is what are the worst arguments you hear atheists making?
Yeah, that might have been it.
Yeah. Like I remember Braxton Hunter like really praising you guys, and and so that was one of that, and just the fact that you guys were really good at like sort of at self-criticism, right? You have a position, but you don't just go around saying my position is right? You're always willing to say, do I have a bad argument in favor of my position? What is wrong with that argument? And so I think that just the sort of honesty that I saw, and the willingness to be wrong, like to accept that you might be wrong. I mean, I don't know. There was a whole lot of things that I got that I'm probably not going to just remember, the feelings that I got off of it. But I was just really impressed with, I don't know, I guess just the honesty of it.
Thank you.
But and the willingness to criticize yourselves, to criticize other people who may hold similar views to you, that it's like, yeah, well, we may agree on the final conclusion, but you know what, and I'm not necessarily saying you guys said this, but it's just kind of like what comes into my mind is that if the way you went about coming to agree with me used bad reasoning, then you're wrong about it, or you could very well be wrong about it. This reminds me of this quote from Abraham Lincoln. It was something about if somebody says something that is true, but they don't have a good reason to think that it's true, that it's basically the same as lying. And so, I don't know. And also the other thing that I noticed was a patience with other people, like and a desire to engage with them. I can't think of words in a positive way, right? That no matter how much they disagree with you, you're I don't know. I see so much bad arguing on Twitter, and people using logical fallacies, people using tired arguments that they shouldn't be using anymore, and arguments that I continue to use even though they're bad arguments to use. And I just, one of the things that it really made me think and reflect on myself, they're like, you mentioned this is a bad argument for atheism or agnosticism or any position. This is a bad argument for that position. And so, I've made some of these arguments myself. Whether or not I agreed with the conclusion of the argument, I've made some of these arguments in order to show somebody what I thought was a flaw in their reasoning. But it's kind of hypocritical if the thing that the tool that I'm using to show that they're wrong is also wrong. And so and it really, I'm using Twitter as a way to learn patience and an assertiveness that doesn't involve getting hostile, right? And so there are things that I learned from that particular podcast of yours that I felt like I need to be applying these to my own approach to other people better. Yeah,
that's really nice of you to say. And I think, I definitely have been very, very, very guilty of making a ton of bad arguments myself and having bad reasoning, and and I still do all the time. I think we quite often do have shortcuts in our reasoning. But what you actually spoke of there right at the start was almost rationality. So the conclusion can be correct, but you can be either rational or irrational on it. If you've reasoned correctly, using the rules of logic, having consistent and coherent beliefs, having no strong evidence against you, then you've got a rational position, even if the actual conclusion is false. And it goes the other way. If the only reason you accept a conclusion is because, well, yeah, Joe said, or something like that, that's pretty bad reasoning. That you're being irrational, even if what I said and the reason you've got that is true. And that's something I think is often missed online with these conversations. And I find it interesting that you mentioned that on Twitter you're trying to do it in use it as a way to stay away from the hostility, because I find these short messages can be quite difficult, because you really want to just break down, okay, I'm going to make this as simple as possible, as few words as possible, cool. And then it can turn into such a heated thing, people, focusing on completely irrelevant parts, and it goes off into so many different trees. So, I mean, trying to stay patient on Twitter is a big challenge.
It's one of the best places to learn to be patient while arguing, because it just really is a shit show most of the
time. One of the things I try to do is assume that the other person, no matter how stupid they may seem, or how hostile they may seem, or any of those things, that in fact they're smart and arguing in good faith. And I try to, I don't succeed all the time, but I try to assume that until they prove otherwise. Often we end up deep down the bunny trail and they say something that's like, that's so disconnected from reality. I can't believe you even went there. Right.
I have noticed a lot of the time people just argue the last thing you said as well, and they quite often contradict themselves rather than actually having a conversation with you. They're just looking to prove your last message wrong. Dave, I cut you off there. Sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, that is one of the best approaches, is to kind of assume everyone's being honest. I mean, most of us, when we go into these discussions, we're being honest. And if you go in with the intent that everybody is your enemy, it's just always going to be combat.
Yeah.
A
couple of questions coming in from the chat. Some of them are a bit on the silly side, but we'll cover them all for the entertainment factor. So first one, how do magnets work?
Okay, so if you have an electric charge that's moving, okay, it generates a magnetic field. Okay, so you have an electron moving, and there is a magnetic field around that. Okay, and so I'm going to run out of my ability to describe this really, really fast, because I'm not a physicist. But there are, so you can think of, okay, I'm going to do some guessing here. Okay. So electrons don't really orbit nuclei, but they kind of do. Okay. And so you can see the electron as a moving charge, right? And so a moving charge is going in a circle is going to generate a magnetic field that loops this. So if you line up the atoms in a piece of metal, okay, so that all of the magnetic domains are pointed in the same direction, which means that all of the rotating charges are sort of around the same axis. I shouldn't make that gesture on a live stream. Then you'll end up creating a coherent magnetic field that's, on average, pointed in the same direction in your ferromagnetic material.
There you go. Is that a good enough explanation for you? It was good enough explanation for me.
I couldn't have done any of that. Yeah.
I'd have gone like, there's these things inside, and you get like a pin, and you go like that on the metal, and it puts them all in the same line, and you get the poles. That's about as good as my explanation of it would be.
I mean, basically, an atom.
I just tried to remember which apologist asked it, because there was some apologist that said you can't explain how magnets work.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sort of like the tide goes in, tide goes out sort of question.
Mm-hmm. So if you think of an atom as being a magnet, okay, and usually they're randomly oriented, so you have a net zero magnetic field. But if you get those atoms all lined up in the same direction, then they'll have magnetic field in the same direction.
Yeah. Thank you for that one. So Why did my hamster stop moving when I put him in the microwave, but my food didn't? Why was your food moving?
It's his food is rach.
Yeah. And we drink Gach live. Randolph says it's more of a statement than anything. He says, when I enter debates, I do so with a number of specific attitudes. One of the most important to me is being, I hope that my interlocutors will convince me to change my mind about something. I think that's a good way to go in there. I'd almost go one further. I say one of the more important things is I hope I learn something. I hope I understand what they're saying. I hope I don't misrepresent them. What other things to you guys do you think are important to go into a debate with?
Well, I'm just going to be honest that I don't necessarily go in. I'm willing to have my mind changed if I'm given, and my mind is often changed when people give me counter evidence to something. But when I'm debating on Twitter, so I've never done a formal debate. I don't know. I don't know. I think that'll take a lot of practice. But when I'm going into a debate on Twitter, one thing I don't have in mind is the expectation that I'm going to change someone else's mind. Okay, I'm just going in. I see something that I can either take issue with because I feel like it's, encouraging discrimination against some minority group, or I find that they're making a statement that I consider to be scientifically just false. Okay, and so I will just compulsively, like without intent, just compulsively have to respond and give, and if there's something that I can cite, then I'll try to do that. And I end up in these arguments, and I'll be, I guess I probably look like I'm trying to change people's minds, but I don't really care. It's more for the just the experience. Like, I mean, to be honest, it's like if I gotta run some tests and they're going to take an hour, then one of the things that I do to deal with the boredom or anxiety or whatever is go on Twitter, and so that's why I'm there. It's just to engage, right, with random people that I don't know about stupid things, and so I'm just there kind of for the fun of it. There are people who, like Tom Jump, for instance, he doesn't even like his job. He doesn't like arguing with people. He's pretty good at it. But he told me that he doesn't really like arguing with people. I'm like, dude, I would love to have your job. If I could spend all day doing nothing but arguing with people professionally, that would be the dream job for me. I don't really care what position I have to take.
That's a good thing to
law.
do, though, as well, isn't it? Though it's a really, really good thing to be able to do, is if you can actually defend a position you don't hold well enough so that someone can't defeat that. Essentially, you steelman it yourself and almost take it as, if this is my position, this is how I would do it. And then I'd sort of go back through it and then take little chinks away in the armor and go, like, this is the best representation of this position I can give, but there's this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, and this is what I'm left with. And then you weigh it up with your current position, and I think it's actually quite effective if you can learn to really, really see. I mean, Dave's really good at still manning a position. That's like an amazing quality of his. He'll give something an incredibly charitable read and steel man it so well. I mean, he even managed to give Aaron Ra's Rock to Atheist a charitable reading.
I was thinking we should write some Bible verses on rocks and call them theistic rocks.
But they still wouldn't believe, so therefore they would still be atheistic.
They would be atheistic and antheistic at the same time.
Yep.
Which violates the principles of essentialism.
It also violates his kind of dichotomy. It's not a false dichotomy to say.
Oh, we lost you again, Dave. I guess the internet in Wales is having some problems after last week's storms.
It's raining.
Oh, okay.
You know, the sheep have moved about in the field and therefore affected transmission.
Sorry, so say again, Dave.
Yeah, it violates his whole dichotomy thing. Everything's either atheist or theist.
Yeah.
Because,
But he's using different definitions for the terms, so at that point you can end up with, anyway. We don't need to go into that one again.
Because Jeff will beat us up.
I'm a big fan of R and Ra.
His science stuff.
His science stuff is amazing. Yeah.
It is. It really is. I mean, I can praise that stuff. He's done a lot of good work with trying to keep creationism out of schools and all of that stuff. It's just, there's certain arguments that he makes seem like he hasn't put much thought into them.
But it is entertaining when he makes them.
Yes, it is.
He's like my favorite pirate Klingon,
That's a really good description.
That is.
He's like a pirate Klingon that you can hug, or something like that. Like he's a teddy bear,
Ethics question, sort of. Can I, in good conscience, kill my neighbour's dog if they are being loud and annoying? I suppose it depends on if you what. No. The answer's no.
Only if it's a pit bull and you go in hand-to-hand challenge or hand-to-paw.
So you were talking about defending a position you don't hold, and obviously I don't have a degree in law, but I have worked as an expert witness. So,
really?
Yeah. So there are a bunch of mobile GPU patents that were, in the past several years, coming up on their 17-year limit, right? And I was a circuit designer at that time, and I designed a graphics processor that you are subject to when you fly in certain countries. They're in the control towers. And so I got hired for a handful of different cases. And what I found is working for a defendant is great because I'm really good at picking holes in somebody's argument. But I hated working for a plaintiff because I totally didn't believe in anything that I was trying. I was like, I kept saying to myself, this is a to troll. How am I going to argue, in favor of what they're trying to say? They send me to look at code. I had to look at some major company's graphics stack, like the source code of their graphics stack. People can guess who I'm talking about, and I'm like, I literally couldn't find in there they sent me to find the smoking gun, the thing that infringed the patent, and it's literally not there. And like in the end, like they basically kind of got mad at me for not being able to like just give them what they wanted. And I'm like, but my job was never to give you what you wanted. My job was to tell you what was there. If you have another argument for, I made $21,000 off of that though. So it wasn't
no,
good, yeah.
But I really enjoyed working as an expert witness. So the first time I did this, it was me. I have a PhD in computer engineering, but I was just a college professor at the time, up against, but at Binghamton University. So like, it's been called the greatest public university in the Northeast, but that's probably a conceit. Okay. Anyway, but good computer science department. Okay. But not Harvard. Okay. But that was me working for this little university, and up against and I think I was paid $150 an hour. Okay. And the witnesses on the other side were a Harvard graphics professor who was paid $600 an hour, and some electrical engineer that does circuit design paid, who knows? I don't know how much he was paid. And up against me being paid far less, but I happen to know both graphics technology and circuit design, which they didn't together, right? So I was able to see things and understand aspects of the chip source code that I was looking at that they couldn't put together. And it was really funny. There was this one thing they were claiming that because they could write OpenGL code to cause the graphics processor to draw this certain thing, that it infringed. But it was one of these situations where your mind is blown by how stupid it is, because I'm like, the algorithm that you're saying infringes the patent is there in the software. You wrote it. Who are you trying to trick here? You found a way by writing this code to make the GPU do an infringing thing because you wrote the code that infringes the
patent. Brilliant. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with the chat. We've actually got a few more questions coming in. So, is it true that we don't actually touch anything and it's all just magnetic fields touching each other?
I mean, yeah, at a physical level, you have electrostatic repulsion, right? I mean, so you're not the electrons of your shoes are not touching the electrons of the carpet. They're being repelled, electrostatically. So, I mean, I don't know how important that is. Like we have our perceptions of the world, kind of like summarize what's going on and give us this feeling that we're touching things, and so I would say that in a sense we are, like, not just because we perceive it that way, but that's as close as you can physically come to touching something. So we are, okay? But technically at a subatomic level, there's space between things, or maybe there isn't, because how at a subatomic level these particles are actually spread out, and like certain interpretations of quantum mechanics actually see like the electrons around a nucleus as being sort of cloud-like, like the probability cloud that the wave function gives you for a particular electron shell. Well, people will actually kind of visualize the electron shell like that. And if I recall correctly, certain kinds of like electron microscope kind of experiments have been done that actually reveal like the shapes of atoms, like to the extent that you can get a shape of an atom, and you actually have like these so how some electron shells are spherical and some of them are like these bulbs, like sticking out, and you can actually like physically get that from interacting with the atom.
Right.
So like there's some realism to those electron cloud kind of ideas. And so wave particle things at the quantum level are kind of spread out, like maybe really properly physically not completely localized until they interact with something, right? And then in which case they, like if they become entangled with like a detector, then, well, so then I can wax philosophical about physics. What happens when you get what's wave function collapse? Okay, do you actually get when you get an electron and you measure it with some kind of detector, and it's going to become entangled with the detector, which is going to change the wave function of the electron. Okay, but what do you actually read from the detector? The detector is an incredibly high gain amplifier. So what you're getting out of it is whatever macroscopic signal that the detector turned its detection into. Which how does that relate to the actual electron? Well, the physicist can tell you.
Yeah, it's definitely blowing my mind a little bit thinking about that.
well, because where I'm coming from what I'm coming from on that is when my graduate study, so I know how CPUs work, but the stuff that I worked on is like reliability and energy efficiency of circuits, and so we'd try to apply architectural level solutions to basically what are circuit level problems, and basically the one of the important things that you learn from looking at things at that level is that the switches, the transistors that make up a CPU, the trillions of them, are high gain amplifiers. They're analog devices that are switching from as off as you can make them to as on as you can make them, as fast as you can make them do that. But that switching time is finite. It's not instantaneous. And there are all kinds of glitches that can occur. There's an external interference that can occur. There's if too much of your circuit starts switching all at once, you'll actually cause a power drain. Your voltage supply will dip, and it's called a voltage emergency, and that will cause the circuit the propagation delays through your circuit to slow down, which will mean that you've got you're a register with some bits in it, and you've got some circuit in between, say a multiplier or whatever, and you got another pipeline register, and the propagation delay will take longer than the clock period, and so you'll get a timing violation on the circuit because too much of the chip switched on at once or started doing switching activity. Like a CMOS logic gate is conducting as little electricity as possible when it's not switching. They still conduct. It's like 30% of the maximum. So all the energy used, or most of the energy used, is when they're switching from off to on or on to off, and that if that switching time can be too long, because the switching time is a function of the supply voltage as well, right? So when you have too much switching, which creates too much current demand on the voltage supply, which being imperfect can't maintain the voltage level that it's at, because you've basically got this charge pump somewhere charging a capacitor, and you pull too much current out of it too fast for the voltage regulator to keep up. So you have the supply dip, which causes delays to increase, which causes timing violations, which causes incorrect computation, and it's actually a lot messier than people pretend that it is.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly in-depth and complicated as well. It's definitely above my level of understanding. I just program. Do this. Oh, it didn't work. Why? Missed a comma. There you go.
Is it a space comma?
Cool. I've actually caught up into the chat. There is just one last thing saying that from Lone Wolf says, we do actually touch things just like we see color. We just see the color a thing is not the color a thing is. We feel the electromagnetic repulsion, and that feeling is the touch, which is basically the what you were alluding to earlier as well. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Wolf.
I'm going to go all the Einstein here and say that what's actually happening with a question like that is a language game problem, where it's sort of like knocking on a desk and saying that's made of a good solid wood, and somebody comes in and says, yeah, but that's mostly empty space. Both things are true. They're just talking in different kind of circumstances.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you've been saying you've been practicing sort of your debating online, just obviously you're not necessarily talking about formal debates, largely Twitter debates. And you say you generally don't go in with the idea that you're going to change someone's mind. In fact, you generally think that you're probably not going to change their mind. But have you ever changed someone's mind about a significant topic on Twitter?
Wow, I got to think about that one. I'm not aware of it. If I have, I think that there are people that I've engaged with who are genuinely not. Okay, so you have people who have these dogmatic beliefs that they don't want to let go of, and no matter what, you can't change their mind. But then you have plenty of people who have a position based on what they know, but are willing to listen to evidence. Okay, and there have been occasions when I have informed somebody of something and didn't get the conspiracy or whatever response, and so they took what I showed them seriously. But did I change their mind? I maybe. I mean, it's like, do I change my mind when I watch a new video on how to do differential calculus, or do I just learn something?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could regard learning something as changing a mind, just a different form of it's, you're not necessarily going back on a position sometimes,
Right.
as you say. You've learned something new. There is a change going on. It's just not the same as changing someone from something big like, I don't know, the shape of the earth or whether a God exists or types of morality or anything like that. Dave did one once, didn't you, David? The old cause and effect one on Facebook. That was quite an entertaining one to watch.
Somebody claimed that God created cause and effect. And I said, well, if that's the case, how could he cause and effect to come into existence without cause and effect already being there? Because you can't have an effect of something without, it following from a cause. And he kind of didn't write anything for about 10 minutes and post it back and go, okay, yeah, I've changed my mind about that.
So there are people out there that are willing to change their mind as well. And that is good to see. So I think that's, you could argue that, cause and effect is in line with God or something like that. But the fact is that he didn't cause and effect. It's just something that was there as, you can make any sort of argument.
Part of his nature or something. Yeah,
exactly.
It's an interesting thing because if that would mean, so that would kind of, so there are these arguments that the only non-contingent thing is God. But if God's ability to do things is contingent on cause and effect pre-existing,
on him having those abilities to begin with, that's it.
then that means that God God, some aspect of God at least is contingent.
Well, that's one of the arguments you'll generally get back, and it'll be like, well, if that's the case, then God isn't the only non-contingent thing, and he's contingent upon other things. And it's like, well, there we go. Yeah.
Never before had anybody say that God exists and is non-contingent, but isn't the only contingent thing. That's a new one. I have to put that in my arsenal.
Yeah, I think when it comes to changing somebody's mind online, the best you can really hope for is to influence them to look at it a different way. And maybe that'll help them start to look at things a bit differently. And eventually, loads of other factors will change their mind.
Yeah, I find quite often for myself is having some in-depth conversations. I might not find my mind changed in the moment, but it's when I've slept on it and thought about it and had a conversation with someone else about it and sort of tried to argue what the other person was arguing with me from their side, and they've come back and told me why that position could be right or wrong or anything, and then I go, okay, I sort of understand it a bit more, and either I have then changed my mind at that point, but very rarely does it ever happen in the moment. It does, obviously, with certain things when it's like, oh God, I'm so clearly wrong about this. But most things, they need to percolate a little.
Yeah. Do a couple of philosophy degrees and you'll find your mind changed 20 times a month.
So usually if I'm wrong about something, I can pretty much rely on somebody who follows me on Twitter is going to tell me. Like, I try to avoid that, right? To a certain degree, I try to make sure that what I claim, I'm got a good reason to claim it, or I try to, within the limits of what Twitter allows, indicate that it's an opinion. But I forgot what I was going to say after that.
I can relate to that.
I think you're right, though. I mean, having an awareness and making other people aware of how much you might know about a topic and how in depth your position is, and whether you are actually saying no, this is the case, or these are my leanings because of these reasons, and I think that can encourage a better conversation as well. If you go like, this is as far as I've looked into this. This is my understanding. Do people agree with it? Do people disagree with it? Can you help me find some resources to find this battle going on in my head so that I can actually there's a better conclusion. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that sometimes doesn't happen with these online conversations, though. It can be really difficult, especially on places like Twitter. So, the fact that you're trying to do it on a place like Twitter and can achieve it as well.
It all comes down to the anonymity that people are kind of abusing in a way. I mean, I'm definitely not the kind of person who says that everybody should be using their real names. That bothers me too. But the fact that we have that anonymity is being abused by people, and not even consciously. It's like they start seeing other people as not human, and therefore, deserving of extreme hostile, assuming that they're extreme hostile reactions, and and you can say something that is kind of nuanced, and you can have somebody come back with a really strong opinion that just like tells you that you're the devil, and I'm like, why don't we like, I didn't even necessarily say what I said in what I thought was a rude manner, but because they're triggered by the comment that I made or something, they just explode. And how do you live like that? Are you familiar with Myers-Briggs?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm an ENTP. I am the most suited to being able to handle this thing because I just love arguing. I was one of the weirdos when I worked at the university or worked in industry that I actually liked meetings. I'm very social too, it takes a lot. There have been times when the discussions have reached a point where they actually really started stressing me out. Now, they waste my time a lot. Okay, I put more time into these things than I should a lot, but usually they don't stress me. There have been occasions when it did, and I've really had to like draw a line and back off from it. But like there's this compulsion that I have, like, but what you said there is wrong, and here's why, and I have to respond to it. I just can't let it go, and because somebody said something wrong on the internet.
Great meme. Yeah, I think with the Myers-Briggs though, I'm still a little bit skeptical about them. I don't think it's possible to really break people down into these personality types as distinctly as it can. I think they can give you a leaning. These are the attributes that are quite common with you. But I mean, I think as your emotional state can change throughout the day, or the situation changes throughout the day, you can jump back and forth into all these other personality types. So it'd be interesting if there was like more done on this, and I don't know.
There's a book. I think the name is Nardi. He actually did like MRI. Dario Nardi, Nardi, and he did like brain scans of people with different personality types and saw what regions of the brain were lit up. He also has in the book some test questions. Now, the test questions are not ones that an amateur who doesn't know this stuff could possibly understand. Maybe if you read the whole chapter, right? But what I see this as is it's not like horoscopes where you use something unconnected to yourself and assume that relates to your personality. What you're doing is you're saying, here's a set of features that maybe within the system has some degree of orthogonality, okay? Like introvert versus extrovert. And so, some binary or real numbered things, like the Big Five has some real numbered categories. And you say, okay, given these categories, let's measure how that person's aptitude or leanings with respect to each of these categories. Okay, boom, you can have a label. But then if you compare Myers-Briggs to something like the Enneagram, there's no correlation between the two, like pretty much none, right? So somebody came up with a set of things to test and tested them, but they're obviously not comprehensive because another group came up with a completely independent set of things to test. And you can be, 5 wing 4, whatever it is. I barely understand an Enneagram. And you can test that, and they just don't correlate with each other. And then you have the Big Five is a system that actually is like something that psychologists came up with that's been peer reviewed, and research is behind it. So there's some reason to suspect that there's some utility in using those categories. But again, because we know that Myers-Briggs isn't the only set of features that you can measure, it's obviously not comprehensive, but that doesn't mean it isn't like useful, right? Now,
I agree there.
But then how do you, then there's the whole problem of how do you objectively measure it? It's very hard to do. You can't, you could, if we had the proper kind of neurological scan technology, then we could look inside your head, maybe figure it out. But if we did that, we'd be like talking about millions of categories because we'd have the actual raw data about what's going on in there rather than these really high level, almost superficial summaries of general tendencies. I do see that they, like, if you know somebody's Myers-Briggs type, you can predict certain aspects of their behavior. You can understand some of their motivations. You can understand why they're talented at this kind of reasoning, less so than that kind of reasoning. I mean, it's interesting stuff. But
it's very interesting. And I agree with you. There's definite utility to it. It has an instrumental value. But I do think that there are, again, some people online who focus very much on, well, this is my, Myers-Briggs test, it says this, which means I'm a rational, logical person, which means I'm just always correct. And you're just like, really? That is a complete contradiction in itself. Well done.
Yeah. I mean, I find, so I had a real professional test me. And what I found out was that I was completely wrong about what I had thought my personality type was previously.
Really?
So, yeah. But she made a compelling argument for why ENTP is a better fit. And yeah, it does explain, it's completely compatible with, one of the things that I miss most from working in academia is teaching. I loved being in front of people. I loved explaining things. And then what I loved even more than teaching was answering questions. That was the best, so even if I want to teach something, I got to have a plan. And I have to have the slides, otherwise I just get completely lost. But when somebody asks a question that's relevant and I understand how to answer it, I love, trying to come up with an understandable answer to the question. I'll be doing that tomorrow night on the Non Sequitur show.
Yeah, that's
nice. So you're definitely going on.
What time?
So it's 8 p.m. Eastern.
9, 10, 11, 12, 1. 1 in the morning GMT.
Yeah, well, you just watch it later.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll have to check it out the next day.
I can't believe I had to count then. It's on a lot of tramadol for my back. So
those silly integers.
I just have to count to 1 in general.
I remember when I was in high school, there was a coach who was talking about how dumb some kid was. He said that he had to unzip his fly to count to 11.
God. Mark says that he imagines that quality of liking being asked questions made you a good lecturer, and I think it will. I mean, especially with the fact that I think being able to explain something to someone in those simplistic terms, as well as something that a lot of people can't do with their language. They seem to use overly complex terminology and almost obfuscate the point, rather than actually just explaining it in terms that someone much younger than them could understand. And if you like being asked questions, I assume that's a quality that you've actually picked up over time, being able to just break it down to everyone. Is there anything along those lines that you could advise to other people on how to learn to do that better? Anything to read, anything to think about?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's just having it be easier to answer questions than to structure a lecture has just always been something that I've been better at. I mean, if I know the topic well, So if I was teaching, one time I did study artificial intelligence, but one semester I taught machine learning, and I'm not anywhere near as good at that, and I struggled with that one. Okay, but I knew computer architecture, and so I almost never had to tell somebody I don't know, let me get back to you. I think I did on a few occasions, have to come back to them on something, but I'm not sure, what it is in my life that has, made me like that, other than maybe just general sort of propensities that I have, something genetic or whatever. Teaching was interesting. I was there for 6 years, and I didn't make tenure, in large part because it would just ruined my health. So I could have gotten a 2-year extension and could have tried to publish more, because that was all I was lacking on. But I just couldn't take it anymore. It's like, if you're not going to give me tenure now, then I'm going to go back to industry.
That's fair.
And but it took me, I'd say, 3 years of teaching to get to the point where I was comfortable, and I could walk in to a lecture without having to do substantial prep ahead of time, because basically prior to that I would literally practice the lectures in advance. And I was just so incredibly nervous. So after about 3 years, I got to the point where not only could I just walk in cold sometimes, because I'd look over the lecture and just try to work out how much I would have to practice, and a lot of times I didn't. And I got to the point where I could actually crack jokes. Like, it's hard to tell a computer architecture joke, but I did it. And it was interesting. I really do miss teaching. I taught graduate computer architecture, but see, the undergrads at Binghamton University are the cream of the crop, the best students from around the state. But the grad students are mostly international students who couldn't get into other universities. Right. Like people whose governments are paying them to come here and get a master's degree. And they want to do software, and I'm teaching a hardware topic, more or less. I try to make it relate, but and so I would have to deal with these unmotivated students that 10% of whom would cheat every semester. And it was really a challenge, but I stuck with that challenge and worked on trying to make the material interesting. I would try to relate it back to things that matter to them. Like security is an important one. There are the Meltdown and Spectre viruses that, in order to understand how they work, you have to understand minutia of out-of-order CPU architecture. And so, I tried to integrate those into the lecture. So my last semester there, out of 82 students, I legit had 61 A's. Because what I did was, I'm like, this is my last semester teaching. So I am going to completely turn on its head the approach that I take to doing this, because what the heck? What could it hurt? So what I did was, I had no exams, and all the homework assignments were project things that were spaced out over the semester, where I wrote a CPU simulation framework where there'd be these functions that they'd have to fill in with code to implement the thing that they were supposed to learn at that moment. And by the end, they'd all written their, out of order superscalar CPU, and actually we didn't get to superscalar. We got to it as a lecture topic, but not in the simulation. And it's up there on GitHub. Okay. And like the students loved it. And students who otherwise wouldn't have, found the topic interesting were able to thrive in it. A lot of these students would not come in with strong computer science backgrounds. Supposedly they have undergrad CS degrees, but not so much. And so I'd have these sessions where where instead of going to the classroom, we'd go to a conference room, and I would sit with students and help them fix stupid bugs in their code. Like, the bug has nothing to do with the assignment. They just made a mistake somewhere, and I'm really good at debugging. So I would help them through that, and they really appreciated that, because it would, free them up to actually care about the course material. So I was really proud of that, without having to do any kind of curving or, anything serious, I had 61 real A's out of 82 students. Normally it was way more Gaussian than that. So
That's brilliant. Yeah,
that's absolutely fantastic. What a way to finish as well. Like, leave on an absolute high note.
I'm like the third digital circuit designer this university has let go of for dumb reasons. So, they actually had to hire me as a consultant the next year to help them with a DARPA project. They didn't know of any circuit designers.
Brilliant. Worked out even better for you then, really. So Wolf has a question for you. He says, should Al on the periodic table be called aluminum or aluminium? Do you side with Davy or the 1935 American Chemical Society?
It all depends on what accent I'm using at the time. So if I'm trying to pretend like I'm from England, then it's aluminium. I really flubbed that one. You got to get me in the right state of mind.
Yeah, I remember when I lived for a year out in America when I was 13, and obviously the internet wasn't such a big thing back then. You know, you're still on dial-up AOL and all of that sort of stuff. So I'd never been in an environment where I heard people say aluminum, and I was just like, what are you guys saying? What is this thing? Like, it's amazing how we can be two countries divided by a common language. You know, these little nuances between the two languages or two versions of English can be really, really, really confusing. But don't you think like aluminum kind of sounds a bit like it's from the Muppets? You know, do 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 aluminum, do 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 do.
I've always been such an avid consumer of British TV that it's just I mean, I know the differences and I'm interested in them, and I'll watch YouTube videos that talk about the differences between American and British English and things like that. But I mean, it like, you know, I was at work one time and somebody from India said aluminium, and one of the other guys was like, "What?" But it didn't faze me because I had heard it so many times, you know. So. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. Not so much of the Chibnall era, but
That's fair. Yeah, no, I do quite enjoy Doctor Who myself. It's really weird seeing it with such a high budget these days. I mean, it's great that it is done there, but I don't know. I mean, who's your favourite Doctor?
Oh my gosh! See, I've seen all of them. Right. So, I'm glooping through them and trying to decide. I mean, each one's brought their own charm, you know, to the role.
That's it. Each one was like a unique version of the Doctor, and brought its own kind of entertaining qualities to it.
And that was one of the good things about the Doctor. Occasionally there'd be one that was a bit too alike to the previous one, and it was a bit like, well, yeah, you're just not quite as good as that last one.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone loves David Tennant.
He's my favorite. Yeah.
But Matt Smith was really good.
He was, yeah. But it took me a second watch through to like Matt Smith, because it was just I was too cut up about Tennant going.
So Hartnell was all right. I mean, you know, I grew attached to him, you know, when I was watching the episodes that I was able to watch for that, and then we get what's the second one?
McGee? No.
Anyway, the guy with that looks like a beetle, and I grew attached to him too. You know, it was interesting. I think that I liked John Pertwee, the third one, better than the first two. I especially liked his assistant Liz Shaw, because she was a real PhD and, you know, a real scientist, you know, and it was very sad to me that she didn't last that long as a character. And the next a companion was okay, but no scientist. This Liz Shaw could like really go toe to toe with the Doctor, and you didn't see that kind of thing again until Catherine Tate.
Yeah.
Oh, man, could she butt heads with a whole different level, right? But still, it was fantastic seeing that kind of synergy. And then we had Tom Baker, of course, and he did some great stuff. And then
that's Wolf's favorite.
Yeah, and then Davison was next, right? Peter Davison, right? And he was good, but he had the vegetable on his, and then Colin Baker, who was the asshole Doctor, and he was great.
He was brilliant. Yeah, everybody hated him, but he was great.
Yeah, no, it was one of those things where it's like it was great to see that kind of side of the Doctor being shown. Like not such a nice guy, but honorable and all of that, right? But kind of a jerk, That was great. And then we had Sylvester Mccoy. That I don't remember very well, although I believe I met him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I got my undergrad degree at the University of South Florida, and their PBS channel showed Doctor Who, and they would do these funding drives where they'd have people on the phones. I even manned a phone one time, and I'm pretty sure that I was there when Sylvester McCoy visited. It's not like I shook his hand or anything, but I think I was in his presence. And then so then we had the hiatus, and we had Paul McGann, who I thought was really good. It was very interesting, that movie. It was American produced, which we'll forgive them for that. And then we go into Christopher Eccleston, and he was really good. And it was unfortunate that he didn't want to continue the role and didn't want to come back, because seeing Matt Smith and Tennant, yeah, and that episode where they meet up with Dr. 8.5, and yeah, that was great. They really got on well, and they had some. It was really quite a fun couple of episodes there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm not sure. I'm never sure about Eccleston. For some reason, every time I look at him, I hear the song "Crocodile Shoes." Yeah, it's Jimmy Nell. I don't know. Maybe my mind thinks he looks like Jimmy Nell, but every episode, it would just be "Crocodile Shoes," and I'm just like, I couldn't escape this, so it just interrupted every single performance. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good in the dynamic, and it's great how all of them have been generally quite unique in themselves. But yeah, apparently Peter Davison is actually David Tennant's father-in-law as well.
Oh yeah, I remember that. There was an episode with Peter Davison's daughter, and she regenerates or something in the episode. But anyway, she married daughter. David Tennant. Yeah. It's funny. The actor playing the Doctor married the woman who played his daughter. It reminds me of stuff that happens in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, I tell you, is a pretty disturbing kind of show.
Yeah, I couldn't get into it. I really couldn't get into Game of Thrones, so I couldn't really comment.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's the sort of thing that like I should like on the surface. Everything about it's something I should like, but it never gelled with me.
Well, people really got into Lost. I've never seen an episode, and I never plan on seeing one.
I mean, that's one I really did like. It did lose it. Like the first couple of seasons of it were phenomenal, and then after it you are more watching it because you've watched it so far and you've bought into the characters. But I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was really entertaining television.
So now, Lost, was it kind of like reality show or reality TV show? Okay, for some reason I thought it was kind of similar to that, but
plane crash on an island.
Yeah. Okay. So, but reality TV, I hate almost all reality TV.
Yes,
it's like they put people together in completely contrived situations and like create conflict. They're probably acting conflict that isn't really there. Okay, but there is one reality TV show that I actually like and respect, Project Runway.
I don't think I've seen that. What's that?
Okay, so they have actual talented people who can actually design clothing, and they pit them against each other in a competition. And Heidi Klum is an executive producer, and they have actual people from the fashion industry judging them. And I mean, and these people come up with some really creative stuff. And I would imagine that some of the conflict is a little bit manufactured, but for the most part, it's not. It's like an actual competition of actually talented people doing talented things.
Yeah, much better than the things like Jersey Shore and all of that crap.
No, yeah. Oh man. Like there are these cooking ones that kind of come close. Like there's one called Nailed It that my kids like to watch. Although I prefer the French one, C'est du gâteau, which kind of means nailed it. I mean, it's funny in French, C'est du gâteau. This is some cake. Is an expression which kind of means the same thing that nailed it means in English. So, boom, there it is, and so you have people like cooking stuff, but you can't taste anything that they make. So I can't really get into it, but you can actually see the actual clothing that these people make. Would never, I would need serious training to just operate a sewing machine, but.
I'm quite conscious of time because you said you wanted to finish around 6, so we've got like about 8 minutes left on that time.
Yeah,
so
I should probably get going soon.
If anyone has any questions, get them in now, please. And Dave, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
No, just wanted to say thank you for coming on. It was really fun, and I learned a whole bunch and some stuff helpful to the comp sci degree that I'm in the middle of doing.
Oh, okay. Well, you can always talk to me on Twitter and whatever about it if like. Nice
one. I mean, it's a side software side, but there's still also hardware stuff involved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do all software now, for the most part. Yeah. I've had people on Twitter like Nathan Ormond asked me some questions because he was thinking about going into grad school. So, anyway, thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun. We could do it again sometime. There's more topics we can discuss.
Definitely. I love that. Yeah, no, it was really, really entertaining. Thanks for taking your time out today.
Sure.
It was interesting for me doing an earlier stream as well. Usually we do them quite a bit later at night. So I mean, if we need to do them around these times, I'm sure we can do them every now and then. I just need to organize it with work. But they were okay this time with me finishing early. I don't know how often they will be. But yeah, no, it was absolutely awesome. And I think this is one that I'm going to have to go back into myself and watch a couple of bits just to let me get the ideas and things that we've discussed. And Sfrida just asked that question again that you mentioned earlier. Says, when are you appearing on Non-Sec? And that was tomorrow night, wasn't it? So, and Sfrida,
Friday.
That's 1 a.m. our time, but 8 p.m. Eastern?
Yeah.
And what's that show about?
Well, so the Non Sequitur show in general has a lot of debates and things, but Steve McRae, since he finally got his channel back, has been getting people on to talk about other things that weren't necessarily controversial or debate oriented or whatever. So he likes to talk about all kinds of philosophical topics. So given that I know computer architecture, and they asked me if I would be willing to do a show on the history of CPUs, and so I've kind of I don't feel done, but I have some slides that I can use to guide a discussion on some of the history and some facts about how CPUs work and things like that. And, but I'm gonna kind of let them guide it because I don't really know where to go. I don't want to go to, talk about things that nobody's going to understand. So, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, awesome. I'm sure it'll be an entertaining.
I reckon it'll be an amazing talk, to be honest. Yeah.
Definitely one that I'll be catching a rerun of, though.
Well, if you can't sleep, you can put it on, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, you might see me there for the first half hour before I actually fall asleep.
Lone Wolf just has one comment saying, back in 1971, PBS produced what has been called the first reality TV show called An American Family. There's good reason it took almost 10 decades for it to happen again. It was a disaster. And I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, reality TV. I mean, there's very little reality in reality TV. And yeah, I think it's something that many of us find incredibly frustrating. Awesome. Right. Well, in that case, I think we'll wrap things up for today. Again, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
Had a great time. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, hopefully we can do it again. And so you've been watching the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Tim. For now. See you all later.
See you later. The rest of your day goes well, mate.
Thanks, you too.
Oh, I'm just leaving that running.
That was a lot of fun.
It was.
Yeah. And weird about my connection.